Good evening, everybody. My name is Anto. Welcome into the stream. This evening, we're going to be doing some collaborative world building for my new campaign set in Sunscar, the Radiant Crown. And this is going to take the form of some map building. This was requested last week in last week's stream. I'm going to be diving into the map for the region, hopefully using Incarnate. I'm going to talk about that in a second, and building out some of the physical features of this region. Now, I don't intend to give my players a fully accurate world map for this region, but I want to have one, and I am kind of intending to release Sunscar as a product at the end if it all comes together right. So I think a map is important, so it's something that we're going to be doing anyway, so we might as well do it on stream. I am going to check that the sound is working while we are waiting for people to trickle in from the notifications. It is indeed. And I'm also going to switch over to this desktop view, which is of the Incarnate desktop app. So for those that don't know, Incarnate is a map making software that allows you to make all kinds of maps. It's what we're going to be using this evening to build out the map of Sunscar. You can see my work in progress in the background there, and there is a desktop version of the Incarnate app. Now, I don't know how this is going to play with my PC while streaming and controlling the stream and having all of the things happening at once, so there's no guarantee that this won't explode in the middle of the stream. And I also don't know whether the image is going to be flickering, because it display the way OBS pulls it in. I've got a feeling some of you might get some flicker. So while we're waiting for people to pull in, let me know whether it's freaking out on your end, because I'm watching back my monitoring and looking at my version on YouTube, and it seems fine, but I can't monitor all the way through. So provided it doesn't freak out, this is what we're going to be doing this evening. If it does freak out, we'll try switch over to the in-browser version. If that doesn't work out, then we'll talk through some of the options that I have in mind for this map. Evening, Jaina, how are we? Wait, a desktop app is actually running offline, or is it a browser like the Legend Keeper desktop app? It is a browser based, so it's a Chromium browser with all of the browser features stripped out that just displays the Incarnate site. It does run a fair bit faster than using it through an actual browser, through a normal browser, and it uses a decent amount less RAM, especially. So when they first put it out, I tested opening up some of my enormous Jewel Cities maps and my Ishtar maps in both browser and the Incarnate desktop app to compare, and it saves a decent amount. I can't remember what the percentage is off the top of my head, but I know that it was a noticeable amount of resources saved. So it seems like having the browser features stripped out and it just being just the Incarnate features does help. Bronduin says, map looks cool, but when I create a map, I keep an eye on biomes. The snow biome is never beside a desert. Yeah, these are just roughed in. These are not in any way final. But we are going to be messing around with these and pulling and dragging. There is going to be a kind of border region between the snowy area and the desert area, and the snowy area is a mountain biome, more so than anything. But like I said, what's on screen at the moment represents maybe 20 minutes of work, maybe, of actual mapping work, and not fussing with the border, just so that I could get a sense of where things were, so that when we take the map into Legend Keeper If we go into Legend Keeper, I will show you what we've been doing with that. So if I turn off the Incarnate page, so this is Legend Keeper, so this is a slightly older version of the map now, but I just wanted something to be able to put into Legend Keeper to start placing pins down, because the faster I could get that kind of concurrent development, the better. And that's why there's this kind of band of color between the two biomes, because I'm like, I know there will be some kind of bridging biome between them where it will go from the kind of cold, frosty, snowy mountains down into something and then into desert. And I wanted to have a variety of biomes, even if it isn't necessarily realistic, because this is going to be a West Marches style of campaign, so there's going to be a lot of exploration, and I didn't want to present the players with like a single biome world to explore, because that can get really boring. I've done kind of single biome campaigns before. My Ashk campaign was predominantly desert, and I found it quite hard to keep coming up with new and interesting things to go on in just a desert over the course of like 3 years. So having multiple biomes for this was really important to me. And all of this can change as we go through, because we're going to go through kind of a process for this. So Broderian says, okay, looks cool. Ask when a desert is near a snow biome, is it with magic or whatever? So many ideas. Yeah, I mean, magic might be an option. This is a land that is saturated with magic. It is a place where a magical sky city has crashed in the ancient past and broken apart, and there are fragments of all of these pieces of the sky city all across this land. And that can explain a lot, but I like to start from a semi-realistic base and then deviate with magic where it makes sense to. For reference, look at part of Iran's topography: very mountains, seasonally snowy, sand mountains, and desert. Yeah, there's a lot of, if you look at Asia specifically, there are a lot of places where you go from kind of cold, snowy mountains very quickly into deserts, because of the way like the rain shelf and the way the rain moves in and stuff, going from those like very cold places straight into like incredibly dry places. So we'll probably have some kind of band of mountains to make sure that we have at least some kind of explainer for why this is separate. Over 3 years can be tough, but deserts, even classic deserts, can have a lot of variety. Yeah, they can have a lot of variety. Most people in the West simply don't live near enough to a desert to experience all of these types. It was more that it was helped by the fact that about halfway through the campaign, the players kind of accidentally started an apocalypse, so we got a lot of magical transformations to the world, which helped keep things fresh. But in that campaign in of itself, at the start was relatively exploration focused, but once you start getting up in the levels, when you're running a more like linear narrative campaign, it becomes less about the exploration, and then the desert just kind of becomes a backdrop, and it requires a lot more like active work on the part of the GM to be like, hey, look, this is different to all of the other desert that you've ever been in. So I wanted to make sure that this time I was running them through a variety of biomes. Broderian says, so do you make paths on the map or do you leave it clear? Is it an open world or maybe only trader streets? So paths and things like that will come way later, depending on where we put mountains and rivers and all of that kind of stuff. And then whether or not I put the maps in Incarnate or use the pathing tool in Legend Keeper will depend. Moonbreaker, welcome! Also, a lot of people forget the desert doesn't always have to be sand. It can just be high plateau that runs into snowy mountains. Exactly. I mean, desert just has to be lack of rainfall, right? I mean, this desert probably will be sand for that classic vibe. Because when I think of kind of sword and sorcery stories, I think of deserts. Deserts are a key part to that. And I think there are elements of classic sword and sorcery and classic fantasy storytelling that just go hand in hand with deserts. But in terms of paths, if there's going to be a published version, maybe there'll be paths on it. That is future me's problem to deal with. But for now, if we switch back to Incarnate. So in the latest version of Incarnate, it's got a bunch more robust layering tools than it used to. So it used to be that you had, I think, 10 or 11 discrete layers that you could put things on, whereas now you can add a layer, and then within each of those layers, if we jump into one that's going to have something here, within each of those layers you can put them in, what is the word for it, so they appear above and below each other to varying degrees, but we get a bunch more options with being able to add our own layers. So what I want to do first of all is kind of give us an overview of what I'm thinking for the map so far, and then we're going to go in and we're going to start roughing out broadly where I want mountains to be. I have a series of videos on the channel on fantasy map making, and we're going to kind of high level follow some of the stuff in that this evening, and it starts mainly with figuring out where mountains are. Now, usually if I was doing a kind of typical location in my world, what I would start with would be my plate tectonics map, because I have a map of Ishtar that has the plate tectonics overlaying on it. But because this island is so distinctly magical and is more gameplay forward in terms of, I'm very aware that it needs to be a West Marches campaign, and there are certain things that I know that I want to have in place to funnel gameplay. I'm going to ignore that for this setting, even though for the rest of the mapping that I do within my world, I usually start from plate tectonics and up. But we're going to start at mountains for this after we run through things. So what I'm currently thinking is that this region is going to be the island of Sunscar is going to be broken up into several distinct regions. Over here on the east, we've got what I'm referring to as kind of forests and plains. So a temperate kind of generic Fantasyland feeling environment where the players will start. So if we zoom all the way in, we have a little marker for our starting town. I've set the grid. We've got two different grids. We've got a 25-mile hex and then a 4-mile grid. So our 25-mile grid is like our day's worth of travel. And then our 4-mile grid is kind of for our more individual, moment-to-moment, make sure that we've got interesting things anywhere the player goes kind of scale. So when we switch back in to Legend Keeper, brain needs to work. You can see that if we zoom in here, I've already started filling in some of these elements with monster lairs and magical item themed dungeons and some Akmiri ruin markers and other dungeons and shrines. And there are some things that I already know that I want to cover and want to include in the world, and the 4-mile grid is ideal for that. So switch back into Incarnate. Then we have this small-ish choke point that separates our kind of eastern verdant zone from the rest of the island, and that is pretty much a gameplay focused thing. So I'm envisioning this whole eastern section would be kind of levels 1 to 4 appropriate for the most part. We'll have a few kind of spike areas that players will be able to encounter and then be like, ooh, that's too strong for us, we're going to have to come back when we've like trained up a little bit, or when we can unlock these things. But predominantly the Verdant Zone will be low level play focused, and then this small choke point is going to have some physical means of blocking progress, either a crashed piece of skyship that has an actual locked door that they have to get through, or a mountain range protected by monsters of a high enough level that you've got to level up to be able to venture west. But the idea is that eventually they'll pass through this little pass, the world will open up, and then they have the options of going north up into what is currently called the Frostbreak Mountains, or down south into the desert. And these will be where our kind of mid-tier of play, so the bulk of the campaign, would take place among these three kind of areas. And then we've got another little kind of narrowing, and then a few more areas for kind of higher tier play. So the furthest points from our starting zone have the highest tier of play. So we have the Deadlands of Kar. So this is a section that is ruled by one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, who is controlling a seal which keeps a dormant god kind of imprisoned beneath the earth, and he's kind of turning this whole region into a Deadlands. Then we have the Mire of Spires, which is kind of a marsh / swampy biome. And then finally, this little island is the Whispering Web, which is going to be where there is a powerful kind of arachnid-themed legendary boss on that island. And that's broadly what I have in mind so far. Moonbreaker says, why not a piece of skyship that is infested with monsters behind the kingdom wall only registered adventurers can get through? Possibly. I like the idea of it being semi-technology based to get through, tied to the Akmiri, and that kind of progression of the meta story of learning what happened to this place and learning more about the Akmiri as being crucial to progress into the rest of the world. I think that's a really cool idea, but I'm trying to keep myself like not commit to anything too hard too soon, because there's a long way to go before we know exactly what's going to be closing off that pass. And then the last thing, the most recent addition to the map down here, is this little note in the water, which is the Womb of Elsewhere. And this came about as a result. If I switch back over to Legend Keeper and jump over to the map of Ishtar and go into my ley lines map, so I have a map of my entire world that is crisscrossed with ley lines, magical lines of power that radiate out from sources of especially powerful magic, and they're each keyed to different elements. So some of them are keyed to transmutation magic, some of them are keyed to chaos magic or profane like abyssal magic, depending on their color code. And so in a separate app, I took this new map that we've been working on for Sunscar, overlaid it over where it should be, and started figuring out where the kind of points of convergence were for the ley lines in this world, or in the region of Sunscar. If we jump in here, you can see that they are these yellow circles and then the Womb of Elsewhere. So we have a point here where the ley lines of chaos and transmutation cross. So at some point, I know that in this hex there's going to be something involving like chaos magic and transmutation magic. Down here we have where the convergence of the chaos line and the ruinous line are. So I know that there's going to be a convergence of like chaos and ruin magic. Similar up here, we've got profane and ruin. And then out here off the coast is where we have a huge conversion point of chaos, conjuration, profane, ruin, and transmutation. It just so happens that there's a ton of ley lines that converge there. And I had already decided that I wanted the waters around this island to be incredibly dangerous, and for the reason that this island stayed like uninhabited after the calamity of the Sky City falling for so long was that the waters around the island are just infested with monsters, and because there is such a powerful leyline convergence there, I'm pretty sure that that is what's going to be spawning the monsters into the waters as our like in-universe reason. And so I went to my list of names that over the years, if I think of an interesting name, I jot it down and like, at some point I will want that name. And among those names was the Womb of Elsewhere. And I was like, that is exactly the kind of weird, esoteric, evocative name that I would want to see on a West Marches map. That if I was an adventurer, I'd hear about it and be like, what the is that? I need to know. I want to go and see what it is right now. So this is going to be our spawn point for all our monsters. And that led on to thinking that the reason why kind of this little area where people are able to make landfall and establish the starting town is there's some kind of Akmiri relic buried beneath the earth that is actively like stopping the monsters from getting there, that kind of thing. Dev Watkins says, I'm driving so can't be active, but I have to ask, what's a scrown? The only thing I can find on the internet is problematic entity on Urban Dictionary. Have I put the wrong I have put the wrong name on? That is fine, we can edit the name right now. That's a good catch there, Dev. It should be crown. That is egg on my face. Let me find the page to make that change. The Radiant Crown. Good catch. There we go. And now, unless you're watching this back after the fact, in which case, hello people from the future, no one would ever know that there was even a problem. Ah, dear me. So, maybe the monsters born in such an intersection tend to follow said ley lines, and the area in the gap between them could be safe for landfall. Maybe the relic can manipulate the ley line flow. Yeah, I'm thinking that it's going to be an artifact buried beneath the earth that is similar to like the like sonic devices that you put up on like buildings to keep animals away, that kind of thing, but like magic. So there is just a little pocket that was almost discovered by accident where people were able to make landfall, and there will be other places where people have crashed ships into this island and become stranded and shipwrecked and stuff, but the main safe harbor will be over on the east by the kind of landfall area. Just refreshing, it still says scrown. Giving it a refresh on my end and it seems to say crown now, so it might just take a little while to update. It's no huge problem, like except for across all of social media where I've posted the link and it will say scrown forever, because I don't know how long they take to update, but it's fine. It's fine. Mistakes happen. The scrounds are a persistent bunch. So what I want to do is somewhere in these things here, I have set up a new brush. Is it this one? Brush 4? Looks like it's brush 4. So let's go ahead and rename brush 4 to be this is going to be our mountain brush. So what we want to do is we want to painting the elevation of the world. So when I keep bumping the mic, I am sorry, I talk with my hands. So when I am working on a new map like this, one of the first things that I like to do is start by figuring out roughly the elevation. And in the previous videos that I have done on this topic, if I go ahead and find them, which is asking a lot actually, because I can't remember what they're called. I think they're just called map making videos, but that's not guaranteed. Just so I can remember what colors I used. Fantasy map making. Cool. So sea level is going to be blue, and then we're going to go green, yellow, red. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and get some colored brushes. Now I know that we're going to have to open up the whole catalog for this to work, which can take ages to load, because I can't remember which of the packs has just the general hue brush. I know when I say it, there it is. It's the night filter. It's just a plain color, and you can change the hue of it really easily. So what we want to do is we want to start, and I'm going to go up here into the corner just so I can remind myself, and we're going to paint in a little blue. And then we are going to paint in, if I can find it, some green. And then we're going to paint in some yellow. No, that's texture scale. That's the wrong one. I want to up the brightness until we find yellow. Yellow, and then red is going to be our mountains. Up the saturation like that. So this is just so that I know which colors go in which order, and this is on a separate brush layer, so we can turn it off. It's non-destructive, it won't do anything to the rest of the map making, and it will just be a reference point throughout the rest of this process. So I need to go ahead and change the color one more time just so that it puts the swatch there so that I can reuse it. And we're going to start with making sure that we've got softness, a nice degree of softness. There we go. And we're just going to very roughly paint blue in everywhere, because we want to start from sea level everywhere around the sea. And we paint all around like this. Actually, we might be better off dropping the opacity a touch so I can see the land beneath it. We start by just knocking in our sea level and then work our way up from that. And this whole point, the whole point of this is that once we have the kind of height map baked in, and we know where the mountains are, it becomes super easy to know where rivers are, where forests will be placed, where other elements are, and you can kind of do the rest of the map making on sort of autopilot really, really easily. So whenever I'm doing this, I always start by just lining the coasts with sea level based height, and again, you can just paint over these. It's all loosey goosey at this stage. I'd have raised the height of the southwest coast of the starting zone, mountains cliff strip that make higher level amphibian monsters from the wound will be blocked from entering the low level area. Yeah, we will probably change some of the coastal heights as we go through this. Like I said, they're from a starting point, it's just imagine that we're building the world up from just a complete flat base, and then we want to think of, if we were starting with plate tectonics, we'd go, right, where do our plate tectonics intersect? These are where we need to put in our mountains or our like gorges based on the movement of the tectonics. That's not what we're doing for this, because as I've said, we have more like gameplay focused things in mind, where I know immediately that I want to wall off here because I want to physically stop the players being able to advance from the verdant east into the island proper without some level of progression. We also know that we're probably going to want some level of height along here to create the separation between the regions, the kind of cold and the desert, or the wet northern region and the dry southern region. And then in terms of other elements, I think I'm probably going to want some mountains kind of running along here. And if we zoom out then and think of the formation of mountains in a broad sense, it's not always the case, but it's useful for thinking of it in kind of rule of thumb, that they'll all kind of travel vaguely in the same direction or fork out kind of like spiderwebbing lightning cracks. It does look like a penguin. I was thinking a penguin holding a lightsaber, like a Sith penguin, which is funny. But if our mountains are moving kind of this direction, then we want to probably carry on that movement of the mountains, because we've already got these mountains here and these mountains here moving broadly along the same plane. So we probably want to either connect them up or have them, or have any other mountains that we put in not be like 90 degrees to that, which makes this bit of mountain somewhat of annoying. So we might have to just change the angle of that slightly. Welcome in, Wild Wolf. We are doing some mapping for Sunscar and just trying to get some basic height maps going on at the moment. So we're going to up our brush size a little. We're going to re-establish our mids, and then we will get some more mountains here, and if they're like that, then they would probably connect down and have some like mountains here. So what I'm thinking is that at some point in the past, this whole line would have been one big line of mountains, and then either from erosion or the changing of tectonics or whatever it be, maybe it's from the magic itself, that's how we end up with our breaks. So we probably want to carry on the mountain here. I'm happy enough having a break along the coastline here, but it might mean that we want to put a little island or a little island chain in the Bay of Widows to kind of carry on that kind of mountain stretch, and then have this section of mountain be what would have been like a fork coming off it. And that means if we want to put mountains up here, we want to either keep them in line with this or like follow this curve rather than have them run in that direction, because then they're at a weird angle that doesn't feel right. If undo wants to work, there we go. So for our mountains up here, we probably want to have the mountains that are going to appear here lean more like around here on the east side. The skyship crashed, flattened part of the mountain chain. I mean, that's absolutely a possibility. At some point we need to work out whether or not the Radiant Crown, the like namesake of the campaign, is a huge section of skyship, and if so, where that is, and adjust the map to fit that. So it could just be that somewhere one of the mountain chains that we end up putting in the world will have just been completely destroyed by that. And any number of them we could decide to like ring out into craters or anything like that. And the purpose of doing this isn't necessarily to get like perfect real world accuracy. It's so that the future steps just become easier, because you're like, right, I know where the mountains are, I know where the wind is coming from, therefore I know where my forests are, I know where my rivers start from, and then I know where the elevation is. So we take our points of high elevation, and then we take our like descending points of elevation and kind of ring them around, and it gives us kind of an idea that, like, if we turn this off, nope, yes, so here on this coastline you can see we've got the yellow area, which is like 2 steps above sea level, so we've probably got some cliffs there, and it probably goes from sea level up to the mountains comparatively quickly to other places, and doesn't have the chance to fall off in a like a gentle rolling hill back down to sea level. So it's exactly like Moonbreaker says, organic accuracy. Like, we just want it to feel natural, that someone looks at the elements and it doesn't immediately throw up alarm bells of, well, that doesn't seem like how it would work. For example, like, I can immediately tell as I'm drawing out the kind of dots here for a potential chain leading into the Bay of Widows, that either these mountains, that these islands would have to just be like mountains to see, or they're gonna need to be reduced in size significantly so that they don't take up the whole bay, because I don't want this bay to be predominantly mountain or island. And by like ringing it out and figuring out the transition of elevation, I can see that I immediately need to change what I'm doing. So I actually think what I'm going to do is, for now, go in and, if I can remember how to subtract. How do I delete? How does that work? It's been so long. It's not the kind of thing that you delete, is it? Because it's a brush. That is fine. We will just leave them there for now. Or we just do that and we paint over them with blue and are like, this is actually sea level. Could also pass the line of mountains through the Carlands. Yes, absolutely. So keep the mountains going and have it go through here as well, because we'll probably have some mountains dotted around anyway, and then have this be what would have once been like one great mountain chain, and that works perfectly well for what we want to do here. And a good thing to do actually is if we jump into the brain is not working. So originally, when I had envisioned this region as kind of an island off the coast of Talabar, you can see by the shape of it that I expected this island would have once been attached to this peninsula, but as we have gone through and started developing this, and I wanted it to look less like Japan, because that's all I could see when I first imported it, it's lost a lot of that shape. So it might move slightly in it where it is in relation to the rest of Talabar. But originally, if I'd followed my original thought, then all of the mountains would have actually been moving that direction, because of the way that, or most of the mountains would have been moving that direction because of the way the kind of island formed along the peninsula. But because we have this choke point, that choke point dictates a lot of things for us. So we could have it going this way and cross over like that, and that would kind of allow us to pull things in. But I'm actually just happy to have it how it is. In terms of height, we want to go in and start blocking in with a bigger brush to make life easier. All our sections of green, which are slightly elevated in relation to sea level, and then fill some of that in, and then we can paint on top of those. And I think that we might just keep the Maya totally at sea level because it is a marsh or like a swamp, so having that be more like a lowland makes a lot of sense to me. The Deadlands of Kar, I think, make sense as being a little more elevated, so having kind of more, maybe not as many mountains, but maybe some mountains, depends. But having those be elevated, having the Maya be lowered, having the Whispering Web maybe rise a little, maybe even get kind of a little bit of the kind of second highest height in there, because the Whispering Web won't be a swamp, but because the Mire of Spires is that kind of marshland, swampland, I want that like sea level there, so it feels right with that. Then I like the idea of having the immediate shorelines around the Womb of Elsewhere being higher to stop like the monsters just immediately coming on land. I think that works quite well. So if we go ahead and up our brush size a little here, and we can have some kind of raised area there, and fill that in. Should the gap between the super high mountains in the north be yellow too, instead of going from red all the way to green and back to red? In the north of the Deadlands, are you talking? They should probably have some yellow around those. And then, so go from green, and then this will go straight into sea level. Exactly, the higher, not in the Deadlands, I meant the Frostbite Mountain, that's more of a valley. Yeah, at the moment it's more valley, and I think it will probably end up looking a little more like multiple like stretches of mountain going through there as we go through. It's very much like the reason that I do it on a separate level, a separate layer, the reason I do it with colors, it's a very painterly approach of like push and pull and like vibing it out and refining over time, and you end up with a kaleidoscope that looks really weird and strange and awful, but becomes very useful as you go along. The Frostbreak being surrounded by mountains would probably turn it into a desert. The winds would mostly be blocked out. Yeah, so we'll probably have the whole thing be mountains, or of a higher elevation, which is something that is easy enough to do. If we take our kind of like higher than sea level and make our kind of coastline higher than sea level, and then we take our not quite mountain but like hills and larger elevation, higher elevation, then we can have this whole area be of a higher elevation. So you go through that little narrow pass and then it rises up into these peaks that is some of the highest elevation that we currently have, and then you've got the actual mountains, and then you've got the slope down as you go towards the desert. And having it be, obviously it wouldn't just be one flat plain, it will be hills and peaks and all of that kind of stuff. I'd like to get a little bit of elevation going on in here, like hills. In terms of, let's turn it off and have a quick look, or turn it back on, and if I go into the Legend Keeper map, I can look at some of the elements that have been added to see whether anything jumps out at me. So we've got a bunch of dungeons and places for monsters to live around there, but somewhere around here there is kind of like a fortress, and I like the idea of it being sort of in a raised position, so having kind of hills and raised areas there is appealing to me. And then I think that I would like probably at least one more bit of mountain up here, kind of get a bit more going. So we've got this here, which would move down to there, so they're at least all kind of following the same direction. And then in terms of here, we want to cut in a little path. I say little and then make it enormous, so that there is a way down from the mountains into the lower desert area, but that it isn't completely exposed, so you've got almost an entire mountain wall separating the two. And then if the winds are coming from the north, then I think that's the way they would need to be. As long as you've got the mountains on one side, you've got the wet side, you've got the dry side. That's all that matters. How do you go over natural resource distribution in such maps with metals, gems, magical ore, etc.? That comes kind of at a later stage, so a lot of the ores and stuff will tend to get kind of tied to mountains and things, or depending on what the resource is, it will be a case of, I need a resource in this region, I'll go ahead and like adjust the map to accommodate. So I would imagine that a lot of the, based on how we're currently looking at it, if there was going to be kind of mining and kind of that sort of resource, would be along the vein of the mountains as our starting point, which would mean that given that this central area where the like frostbreak region actually is of a higher elevation, we'd probably, in the before times, before the Sky City crashed down, likely have had kind of high wealth areas down on the tip of the verdant lands where the you know, you don't have as high of an elevation, but you've got the mountains where they could mine near this barrier region, and also in what is now the mountains that separate the desert. This might not have been a desert back then, 1,000 years ago, but that is really good stuff to think about when it comes to populating the map for, like, where are our ancient cities going to be placed. I have one on the map already that is placed in kind of this region here, because it's next to a long bay that should have pretty stable waters, would have had been an ideal place for like shipping lanes and stuff. But as the players explore through the world, they will be able to find abandoned cities from the old world, from whatever culture occupied this place before the sky fell and destroyed it, and then it became abandoned for a millennia, or however long we end up deciding to set this, where in relation to everywhere else we decide to set this. In terms of some more like yellow areas, so our second highest, like I feel like stretching out into here a little bit, and then same here, like just making the edges a little bit more random, so that as we get to the point of starting to put in rivers and things, there's more elevation changes to deal with. So the Deadlands having a little bit of mountain. I quite like the idea of ringing the Deadlands in mountain and having it inverting what we currently have. So have the center of the Deadlands being lower than the rest, and it kind of being what would seem like a giant crater if you were to look at it from space. Not that the players ever could. That could be quite interesting, but I feel like that almost certainly commits me to being like, oh, if a huge piece of the Sky City crashed, this is where it crashed, because why else is there a big old ring of mountains here? I think that's probably the next step, figuring out if a large section of the Sky City crashed, if the Radiant Crown is actually a large section of this ancient city, like the heart of the city. If that is the case, and it did crash, where did it crash? So what I have in my mind is that the entire island will be covered in these fragments of the Sky City, which will be buried in the earth and now be like dungeons or spires. Like the Mire of Spires is just going to have this like marsh or sewer that has tons of these pieces jutting from it. In terms of like from a gameplay perspective, it makes more sense to have the Radiant Crown put somewhere to the west of our blockade, because if the purpose of that is to keep the players to the east of it for the first sort of 4 or 5 levels, for it to be our starting region, I don't necessarily want to put like the most important thing on the map in that region, which means that we're dealing with the western portion of the map. And if it wasn't for the fact that there is a Terras seal, which is that imprisoned primordial god, one of the seals keeping them at bay, in the Deadlands, I would probably put it in the Deadlands. But I think maybe in the desert, and that could help explain why the desert's a desert, because enormous city-sized piece of debris falls from the sky, strikes the earth, superheats the earth, and just burns out all the life that was around it. You know, the mountains could have acted like a fire break. So putting the Radiant Crown somewhere like here could work. Could always have the entrance be west and the actual Sky City be deep underground. Yeah, the actual, if the Radiant Crown is a fragment of the Sky City, it will be deep underground. So I don't want the players to be able to arrive at the location and immediately be like, this is where we've been looking for, because it robs a lot of the drama of, well, what is the Radiant Crown? Why are people looking for it? That kind of stuff. Excuse me, but I would like to know what it is ahead of time. And I think that if we go ahead and take a black brush and use that as our lower than sea level indicator, then we can have kind of a little X marks the spot situation where we decide just arbitrarily that the Radiant Crown is going to be here, and then we can base decisions on that. So it is going to be buried deep underground. This happened upwards of 1,000 years ago, so there's a lot of time for the world to change around it. So it's not like it's going to be jutting from the earth, it's going to be buried. It's not like we have to have a huge crater around it. But I do think that we probably want to have like a little bit of an indication that this is here. Like the ground is a little bit lower around here and then rings out, which would mean that we probably would want to have some kind of rising elements kind of like around it maybe, but then it draws too much attention once we start putting in the stamps. So I think keeping it at like sea level, below sea level, and then a little X marks the spot, just so that I've got a sense of if it's going to be where it is. That makes no sense. If it is going to be that the Radiant Crown is a piece of Sky City, I at least know where it is. Because again, at least for now, players are never going to see this map. Because I don't think players getting a full kind of accurate picture of the map in a West Marches style campaign is a good idea. But I want to know where things are, and if the view is to publish this, I want to know where things are for the sake of publication. So for now, it can be there. Relatively happy with the Frostbreak Mountains being higher elevation and a bunch of mountain chains, and then there being mountains in the south here of the Verdant Lands, and then having a couple of spots of like higher elevation. And as I fill it in with stamps and stuff, I will randomly choose to put in hills and things as and when I see fit as well. But another thing to consider is that if this is the starting town is going to need fresh water. There is no real elevation for that to change, so probably do want to put some kind of rising elevation in here just to justify our rivers. So just get a string in there so that there's something for the rivers to flow from in a sensible manner. The crown could be in the mountains, and the passage from the east would be through a large cave system directly to the desert. And then to climb the mountains, you'd start in the desert and climb eastward. Possibly, it's because it's so early in the process. I'm not sure where I want the crown to be. Like here, my gut says desert, because I think that tickles my brain in a way that I enjoy more. But I'm still not committed to the crown being part of the Sky City. The crown could be an artifact. The crown could be a person, you know. There's still options for the direction to take that. And then I want to take some... I think I'm going to take the Deadlands of Kar and kind of bring this raised area out, because then we get a kind of little shelf for the rainfall to move into, to like oversaturate the Myra Spires, to swampify it, rather than it just being all flat and it being like flooded. It being this is part of the reason why this is such a like wet region is because it's downhill fairly noticeably downhill. So like having some more of the Maya connected to the Deadlands could work. It could be all three. It could be all three. That is one of the nice things about a sandboxy style game, but a West Marches style game, is that I really don't have to have the answer to any of this stuff until a long time from now. But I think thinking about it early helps make decisions as we go through the process. So, relatively happy with the elevation for now. I can turn it off and we are unaffected. But I think that what I want now is to figure out some mountains. And I want to take this layer and I want to drop the opacity on it so that I can see what's underneath it. I might drop the opacity more than that actually, like that, because I only really want to be able to see the mountainy areas. And then we go onto the mountains layer and we grab our stamp and we figure out which mountain stamp we want for our verdant area. So green mountains is a reasonable start. So this is going to start at 100% scale. I don't want it at 100% scale, so I'm going to tone it down to 20 so we can get like 2 to 3 mountains per hex. Feels nicer for me. And then if we go into options, we can play with the density and the area. So I want to place multiple mountains at once. I don't want them super dense straight away, because I want to be able to like paint them in. That's probably not dense enough. Up the density. Still not dense enough, because I want to be able to paint in and then go in and manually start like clicking them in. But that's gonna take some tweaking. Mountain brush, drop the opacity again, and then mountains. Jaynat says the swamps would make more sense in a place where elevated rocky land prevents the water from flowing to the sea, so they collect in a place instead. Either that or a river delta or a bayou. Yeah, the what I was more of thinking was having like river deltas, bayous, and that kind of style. Just having it be even more dangerous fantasy Florida. That's what's in my mind. For like the Mire of Spires. So up the density again and see. That's more like it. Right, okay. So paint in a Maya Man legend. Yes. So I've gone ahead and set the scale to 20. That is currently my working scale. So anytime I want to place a stamp, I start by setting the scale to 20, see how it looks, adjust as needed. Then I've set it to place in an area with some density and like painted in a band of mountains. Then the next step is to go back into individual stamps and start filling in where it hasn't, so we get a nicer range. So it looks like a proper range of mountains coming along the bottom here. And then what I like to do is go in and work big to small. So we started with green mountains, so then I'll go to these more rounded green mountains and I will work them in around the edges of that, and then do the same, go from that to hills, and that gives us kind of the illusion of falling elevation. So if we go ahead and change our area, we want to really bring down the density here, maybe bring it up a little bit more actually, and then that is not working for me. We will hand place them. So just start filling in a little bit of the space with some of these rounded mountains that appear a little visually smaller than what we've got at the moment, so that it feels like there is this sense of like changing of elevation. And then go ahead and put some of them in, kind of all around. And one thing that I like to keep in mind is sometimes you'll get like here where that you've got this stamp and you've got this little space that goes behind it. If I put another stamp there, then what we get is the impression of some flat land that jets into those stamps there. That can be a great place to like start rivers for, and have the rivers appear from behind mountains. So it feels like, oh, there is the source of the river, but you don't have to see where it actually pops into existence on the map. So I like to leave a couple of those when I spot them, and then use a few of these little ones to fill in the gaps like that. And then we go in with smaller hills. So open up the catalog again, we get the next layer down of hills, which gives us something slightly smaller. Broken Serenity says, saw a video recently where someone tested the theory of what if Spinosauruses were plopped in Florida Everglades. Pretty much ended up as a way more deadly Everglades. That's kind of what I'm thinking, like just Everglades but magic. So then we take our hills, again slightly smaller hills, which occasionally we'll throw in a random enormous one. So we want to try and be aware of that and drop the sizing maybe, so they're not so enormous. And put some of these around. And then the last thing that we will do is we'll take some of the actual small scale hills, and place them in, putting some of them in little clusters, some of them on their own, and then taking the small hills and filling them in like here. And I'm not too precious about where I'm putting things, especially at this stage, because everything that we're doing is pretty non-destructive and everything is separated out into its own layers. It's really easy to go in and change. So then we go and we take our little green hills, and then we would start placing them around the foothills of the mountain to get that progression of large to small chain of mountain. And because of the opacity, it looks like there's just a spotlight being shined on them, which is funny. If we turn off the mountain brush, we get a better sense of how it looks. At the moment, it sticks out like a sore thumb because we've not done any ground blending or done any tweaking to the values of the stamps. All of that comes later. This is just about getting rough forms in place. So a lot of the work that goes into like making Incarnate style, Wonder Draft style, these more stamp focused map makers look good, is working in lots of layers, working back and forth, making sure that you are kind of constantly working in light elements and not just like placing a bunch of stamps down and calling it done, because then they have that kind of like Wonder Draft Incarnate kind of stamp based vibe that a lot of people don't like. So I go ahead, am I able to just paint these in? I'm sure I used to be able to just paint these in. Yes, I can paint them in. Cool. So I can use these to fill in some of the gaps. That's better. My main issue with the pointy peak-shaped blob mountain is it creates very jagged chains of mountain rather than more elongated ranges. Okay, if you want the Alps, but not all mountain ranges are the Alps. No, not all mountain ranges are the Alps. I completely agree. I think that for me, it's a case of acknowledging that kind of what we're doing is like a halfway step between, not even a halfway step, we're going slightly more realistic than abstract, but in this scale really speaking, the mountains would just be lines. You know, if we wanted to do mountains on here, the way we would really do it that would look realistic is we'd go in and we'd take brown tones and dark tones, and if I jump into what am I looking for here? Not that. This. Yeah, this is what I'm looking for. So if we were doing it in a more realistic scale, so like in my map of Ishtar, so this is in Legend Keeper, but the map was made using Incarnate. You can see that I've denoted mountain ranges with lines and like physical sketching within Incarnate, and then color rather than any stamps, because we're working at such a large scale. So if we go, and I'll show you the dual cities, you can see that there's this massive mountain range on the zoomed in map, but when we go to the world view map, it's just this darkened browner patch. So really what I'm trying to achieve with the kind of region scale maps is enough that the players cannot mistake that is a big mountain range. Because, you know, if each of these hexes is 4 miles, it's reasonable that any one of these hexes could contain hills and mountains that wouldn't even appear on a map. So really we only want to focus on like the largest things that everyone would know about, that would actually get noted on these kind of like region maps. How do you print larger maps from Incarnate? I have some maps I want to make and considering going for the paid version. So the way I approach printing them is I will go to the export option and export as the largest possible size that I could, which is 16K. It takes an age to export if you don't flatten your images before you do. I tend not to because I don't like the destructive nature of flattening, but you just wait. You wait a million years and eventually it exports like a 90 or 100 megabyte file that you can then either send to your printer or send to get printed. So I typically send them off to like poster makers for like A2 sized posters for my campaigns. I don't even know where I have put them, but I have a couple of printouts from previous campaigns somewhere, but I don't know where they are. This got annoying when I tried to map a small volcanic island and had to choose between tiny volcano or lots of mountains when all I wanted was one big mid-slope volcano, Mount Fuji style. Full on brain fart then. Mount Fuji style. The map was just the island. In the world map it looked fine because the stamp was as small as the island. Yeah, like depending on the scale you work in, sometimes the stamps feel too big, and that's something I notice a lot with like Incarnate and Wonder Draft maps that look bad almost always have too big stamps. The stamps are almost always way bigger than they should be. You know, what I will typically see is someone doing like a map like this, and they want to put a mountain range in like this, and we go fit screen, we're at 95% zoom here, and you can see that our mountain range from this distance, from this zoom distance, you kind of lose sight of our individual peaks here. It just becomes almost like in the world map, that band of color, and especially once we've gone in, started coloring the ground, adding in shading, adjusting the values and the hues of the individual stamps, that will become like less stand out, and it will become more blended. But a lot of people will be like, oh, I want some mountains here, and they'll take the 100 scale mountains and they'll do that, and the stamp is way too big for the size of the island, or the size of the map. Like, for the mountains to appear this size, really you'd want something that's, in terms of distance from end to end, easily like a quarter or a sixth of the scale. It really messes with the scale of your brain, because you're like, oh, this map is like 400 miles across. Well, each of those mountain stamps is like 20 miles across, and it's one of the things that really pulls you out of seeing the map as anything but just stamps, which is why I much prefer going really small or much smaller with the stamps, using a lot of them, and then going in with color and really making light and shadow be the bigger difference. I have one tree stamp that is obnoxiously big, but when you check out the point, you find the tree is actually to scale for the map because it's that big. Yeah, I've got a similar thing on the Jewel Cities. There's like a world tree in one of the forests, and then there's a massive tree stamp. That makes sense. Or if you've got like one mountain that is truly enormous, that makes sense. Like if your mountains are unnaturally huge, but it's one of the like scale and then like light and shadow, I think, are the two biggest things that make stamp based map makers stand out as being such, especially when you find people who are like, I don't like incarnate maps, I don't like Wonder Draft maps. Usually it's because they're like, oh, they all look like that, because they all look like they're just a bunch of stamps slapped down. You have to be conscious of the scale you're working on. If your entire map is covering a region, the size of, say, I'm real brain foggy. Spain or Cyprus, size the stamps accordingly. Exactly. Much more succinct than I managed to be, even reading it. Damn, my brain is turning to mush. So to give an example, let's go in onto our land brush and just really quickly. So in our land brush, we know we've got mountains here. We know that the mountains are greenish, and I say greenish because there's brown tones in there, there's some yellow tones in there, there's some grey tones in there. Just against the green background, if we turn off the grids so we get a more pure view. Now this is already some blended greens, but they stand out quite a lot. So the first thing that I would do is I would take a darker brown in this case, drop the opacity so we get some of that green in it, and then start painting behind it. And you can see that as I do that, it darkens the ground, but there's also some transparent elements to some of these stamps. So it darkens the stamps themselves and starts blending them in. So start painting those in and then pull back and look at it. Straight away, I'm like, right, the hills are now wrong. What's wrong about them? They're too yellow-green is what's wrong with them. So if I go into my mountains layer and select all of my green hills like this, I can then come into the tweak colors and I can start playing with the hue and the saturation. So straight away, let's just drop the saturation, and immediately that is better. That matches the rest of the mountains way better than it did before, just because they're a little more desaturated. We could then work in the background colors so that the desaturated greens match in with the ground a little bit more. Or we can play with brightness as well. So I can see that going brighter or darker doesn't really work here for what we've got against the ground, but I'm not referencing against the ground, I'm referencing against the other stamps. We want to unify the stamps, and then we unify the stamps to the ground. So going dark doesn't work against the stamps, going too light doesn't work against the stamps. So we just want to keep it about where it was. Then we can again play with the contrast. Up in the contrast kind of gives us more of those harsh dark lines, but those aren't really present on our larger stamps because of the scale. They have dark lines, but not of the kind of thickness that we have. So we probably want to keep the contrast. We might tweak it up just a little. And then in terms of hue, if we pump the saturation all the way up, we can see that we are way too yellow, and we want to shift that yellow into the green and then start dropping our saturation back down and compare. Now it is too green, so we want to pull back a little bit until we get something that feels better at like a glance compared to what everything was before. We can do the same with the green mountains as well, because we've used one stamp type for all of the mountains. We can change the hue, make them really crazy colors, or desaturate them if we wanted like slate mountains or an Emin Muil style grey expanse of jagged rock. Bringing down all of the saturation is a great way to do that. Or we can adjust our brightnesses, and I think that we might want to adjust our brightnesses just a hair up and tweak our contrast a little, just so that they all match. So now the range is looking more unified. Then we can go in to our land brush and start getting a ground that feels more like that. So I'm looking for a desaturated grey-green. So we start by looking at what we have already. So we've got pale rough grass. That kind of gets us where we want to be. You can see how it unifies the colors a little. So if we undo that we don't want to work right up to the end color straight away. We want to work in multiple passes of low opacity, ideally with a nice big brush, and use really small dragging strokes with the mouse rather than just click and drag the mouse in one continuous movement. We're going to do that. You want small little scratchy movements, leaves lots of little imperfections in where you're putting all of the kind of color down, so you get a lot of the other colors peeking through, and then when you go in for your next tone, you can be like, right, now I want some brown because I want to darken the center of this, because I want the idea the center of our like spine of mountains is darker than the edge. So we go and get a brown, and we drop our size, drop the opacity, because brown is a much more powerful color, and then with our little scratchy strokes start working in. If it's not enough, we can bring the opacity up just to get that like dark core to the mountain as it tapers off, and then zoom out and be like, right, that blends into its immediate environment more, but not as much the surround. So let's take our nice big brush and lighten the surround like that, and then it's much less stark against the surrounding area. If we want to add more texture, we can open up the browser and look for some of the alpha channels. So there are a bunch in here, if I can find them, that are things like grass and like lines and hatches. I can't remember where they are off the top of my head, but most of the styles have some. If we go to grasslands, it's not in grasslands, terrain, grass patches. So if we undo that, and I'll whack the opacity all the way up just so you can see what it should look like. See, it's putting in that little like speckly texture. So drop our opacity again and just start working in this speckly texture, and it is another thing that helps make that feel of transition from the peaks into the flats. I almost always work the symbols in complete grayscale and then save color in for the end. Otherwise, I find myself taking 10 times as long just to work out a single region on the map. Without color, it lets me focus on putting the shapes down. Yeah, that is another really good way to do it. Especially if you're working with symbols that can be completely colored, like through brushstrokes. Like a lot of in Wonderdraft, there's a lot of the symbols that you can paint color onto. So putting them all down in grayscale and then painting the color onto them after the fact can be a really quick way to do it. I wouldn't usually blend out a region of mountains to this degree this early, but I want to make sure that, like, for you folks watching and for any of you folks that are watching this like as a video on demand, that there's like useful, actionable pieces of information in here, as well as me just like tinkering and doing the little bits and pieces that I need to for the map. So I figured, like, I can't. I mean, I could undo all of that. Can I go into the history? If I go into the history, can I redo this? Is the question. Let's find out. So if we go to picture it in your mind what this looks like right now, and then we restore and compare it to that. So if we take and close that, here's where we started, where the stamps just look placed on. They look much more stark against the background, and I have completely undone all of that work because I can no longer go forward. I have done exactly what I thought would happen. That's absolutely fine. That is all work I can redo real easy. So hopefully that was useful, because I've undone it all. But if we bring back up our mountain brush, so that gives us one of our mountain ranges. And I think our mountain range is enough for today, given that we have so many to do. From here, redo from the history. History. No, I think I messed up the ordering and undid it, did something else immediately, deleted that part of the history. But again, it's no problem. Like, it's not huge work to redo, you know, because I'm gonna have to go in and do so many mountains anyway, and I'll be coloring in the ground over time. So very little of, if I find the mountain brush, very little of this tone is gonna stay in place anyway as we go along. Saving is a good shout though. I have not saved the entire time we've been doing this. Yes. Autosave is the best thing that they have added to the 2.0 version, because I am a fiend for not saving my work. I get so locked in and I just completely forget that saving is even a thing that has to be done. When we used to stream on Twitch, there was a Twitch redeem that was like, save your damn work, because I'm terrible for it. But one thing that we will do now is, this mountain range is one contained block of stamps. Because we have the option to add so many layers now within Incarnate, it's very useful to keep all of these mountains in one block so that they are not connected to anything else on the map. So instead of just having this layer called mountains, I would rename it and I'd call it mountains 1 for now, so that if I want to, I can individually turn off individual sections of mountain. But more importantly, if I wanted to bake elements into the map, I can be like, I know that I have finished this area, I can bake this in and know that I'm not going to touch anything else. This is something that wasn't really super possible outside of grouping in Incarnate 1. And even then, I would forget to do it all the time because I would get too far in the process and start working on something else and then have things in the group that shouldn't be in the group. But now that you can add, I believe, as many layers as you want, it's much easier to be like, right, okay, this section of mountains, I'm not going to touch again. So they get kind of put off, and then I can go in and go into another object layer and call it mountains 2. This naming convention is awful. Don't do this, because very quickly you'll forget what is mountain 1, what is mountain 2. So actually we're gonna solve this problem now. We'll keep mountains as our like main category, and then we'll go verdant south as the kind of tag for that. And then if we were gonna work on, let's say, Frostbreak Mountains, we'd go mountains, Frostbreak, northwest, northeast. So that as we're looking at it in the layers, we get a sense of, right, where are the mountains that I'm looking for? Because so many times in older maps, I'm scrolling through the layers and I'm like, I've got no idea what I'm looking for because I have not named these things properly. And it's a nightmare. So learn from my mistakes. Name your layers in better ways than I do. But from here, what we can do is we can start thinking about rivers, or an example of rivers. I'll give you a very small example of a river using this mountain. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do rivers in Incarnate. You can go ahead and you can use the land tool, and you can set it to like the smallest possible size, and you can subtract your rivers out of the land. I'm not a huge fan of this because depending on what you've got set up with your like outlines and your like coastal banding, it can make it look a little bit weird, but it is very consistent. So wherever I draw a river, it will look the same and it will give me the same kind of style, which can be very useful. Another option is to go in with a paintbrush, and you can make a new layer. If we go new brush layer and call it rivers, and then go into the brush and select the brush. We don't want terrain, we want fantasy world, and we want water. And then take our brush size all the way down and up our opacity all the way up, and then paint in water. The problem with that, as you can see, is that it is not bound to the edge of the land. I'm not 100% sure whether you can mask it into it. There are masking options in Incarnate 2, but I have not played around with them fully to see whether or not you can tie masks to other layers like you would be able to in something like Photoshop, where you can take your base land, create a mask that's tied to that, and bind brush layers, more than one brush layer to that. But if you were to like be very careful, you might be able to paint in a river like that. Another option is to use the is it pen tool, the line tool, so either in free draw, probably in free draw, or the pen mode, to draw in a line, which wouldn't look anything like that because that is a dash. To draw in a basic line, let's just draw in, that's going to be way too thick, but you could draw in a much smaller river. Let's scale it down, something like that. I actually think on reflection the easiest way to do it is to just subtract with your land tool, because it binds itself to the land mass, and you can like work in and erase the edge of your river and create more natural looking river formations, especially river mouths, using that. But the line tool, the brush tool with different blending options is something that you can do. But whenever I'm building out rivers, if we just undo that back again, I will almost always try and start my river behind a mountain stamp. So instead of having a river just spring out of nowhere, I will almost always try and start it behind a mountain stamp and then snake it out so that it appears like it actually has a source. And then I can go in and go into my mountains and move them as necessary. So I'd move the stamps out of the way of the river if it's gone in the way of the river, or take a stamp like this one and move it so that it comes out from behind it, that kind of stuff. If we go ahead and do all of that, and broadly speaking, I will usually start by choosing either where I want the end of the river to be and work backwards, or just pick a point in the mountain. So if we up our mountain brush opacity again, I'd pick a point in a mountain in one of our red zones, and then let's find somewhere that this works well for. So let's say I started here. The water will always move from high elevation to low elevation, so we know that it's going to go from here to the lower elevation, to the lower elevation, to the lower elevation. So it dictates the shape of the river. If we were to start a river here, do our subtract tool, we start it in this hex here, be like, right, okay, it goes here, and then we've got lower elevation. From there, where do we go? Where's the next point of low elevation? It's the green. Snake our way to the green. From there, where's the next point of low elevation? The next point of low elevation is probably closest going to be the blue. So it dictates what shape the river takes, and it helps the rivers again feel a little bit more natural. We're not going for like perfect kind of geography, but it helps the feel. You have a faint green area in the yellow, you can follow and put a lake, or do that. If you have areas like that, great for working out where to put lakes and stuff. This is the approach that I took for most of the maps that I've made. So if we go ahead again and jump into if we jump into my Jewel Cities map in Legend Keeper here, and if we just turn off the bookmark bar so you can see the whole thing. This is the approach that I took for most of my maps, including this one, so you can see that they move from the mountains down to the sea, or there are areas in which there was lowland where they've formed lakes or basins, or you've had rivers that converge, multiple rivers that converge, as well as having these little fjords with multiple rivers feeding into them. And it's a useful way of just getting natural enough feeling rivers. And again, that's the whole point, right? You just want it to feel natural enough. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect. In terms of where we go from here, so we've got the height map, or at least the start of the height map, either over the next week if I have the time, or maybe in next week's stream. It'll be a case of putting in a whole bunch more mountains, and then once the mountains and the rivers are in, things start moving a lot faster, because then you pick a predominant wind direction, then that dictates where pretty much all of your forests are going to be, and then you're off to the races. Excuse me. I remember the Twitch streams where you populated the map. That was a fun watch. Yeah, it was a lot of fun building out the Jewel Cities of Talabar, and I'm really looking forward to doing the Same for Sunscar, being able to go through and start putting all of our pins in. I haven't been able to help myself, and I have already gone in and started putting in some of the pins onto the map. So if I zoom in here, we've got our starting town. Around that, we've got a bunch of kind of markers for monsters. So we've got a direwolf, we've got some living woods where we'd have like tree blights and shrieker funguses and that kind of stuff. We've got a predator beast, so like a big cat or a wolf or a bear, one of those like level 1 appropriate monsters. Bandits, we've got dungeons, so a demonic themed dungeon. The monsters for that would be mains, dretches, cultists. We've got dungeons for the undead, which is going to be filled with skeletons. And a lot of this was just loading up D&D Beyond, sorting the monsters by CR, going through and being like, right, it would be fun to put the players in front of some skeletons so we can have an undead dungeon. It would be fun to put the players in front of some fiends so we can have a demonic dungeon, that kind of thing. It would be fun to put them in front of an ooze, so this dungeon is filled with oozes and the liquefied bodies of their victims. Gross. And then going through and placing them, and then as well going, right, okay, I know I'm going to want some Akmiri pieces here, so just arbitrarily putting some Akmiri ruins down, so I can be like, right, okay, the knowledge of the Akmiri ruin being there can inform the context of some of the surrounding elements. So if we have stuff in the hexes around it, we can go, I know this is in the hex next to an Akmiri ruin, does that influence anything? And hopefully by doing that over the course of hundreds of pins, we will end up with a robust world that feels like I could run a party through it with very short notice, because they'd be like, right, I know where they're starting, and they'd be like, right, just pick a cardinal direction, and I know what things you might run into, and I have the roll tables ready to go. And I'll show you some of the stuff that I've been doing for the kind of population tables to fill out the map, because in last week's stream I loaded up my GM toolkit and loaded up my point of interest generator, but that is much more of a generic point of interest generator for like a generic setting, whereas this very much is not a generic setting, so it needs something much more bespoke. So if we jump in here, this is what I'm working on at the moment in terms of the generator. So this is the kind of one-step process for generating the contents of a hex. So it is what is the discovery within the hex, so whether it's ruins or landmarks, a creature lair, some weird phenomena, some faction activity, or like tracks and clues for another thing. What's the danger level of it? What's the cataclysm influence, which is, I know that the Sky City has fallen to the ground and has a lot of magical like weirdness surrounding it. How is that represented in this hex? How difficult is it to see? What's the reward value? And then what's the situation in this place? So in this example that's come up as soon as we've loaded it up, the players would arrive in a hex and they'd roll to see if they find anything. And if they rolled over a 13, they'd see some ruins. And this ruin is occupied, so I just need to figure out what it's occupied by. And it has a high reward value and moderate danger level. So from one roll, I can go, cool, you've entered a hex. I know what's in that hex. It's ruins. It's going to have moderate danger level, so I know the kind of XP bracket I need to build my encounters out of for it. I'm doing it for the moderate XP bracket. I know the reward value based on your level, so let's say you're level 3. I go into my Dungeonomics page and I'm like, right, level 3, high reward, 62 gold pieces per player worth of stuff. And then the situation is that it is occupied, so some creature or faction or something is occupying it. And that's the kind of high level element of this generator, and I want each kind of notable part of it to have like another generator tied to it. So for the ruins have their own roll table, which would give me up to 20 different options for what this ruin could be. So in this case, this ruin is an Akmiri tower. So this is one of the towers of the skyship that has crashed and is jutting out of the earth, and it is occupied. So we look at the creature type. What creature type have we rolled? We've rolled Fiend. So currently this is an Akmiri tower, a ruined Akmiri tower occupied by fiends that the players have come across, that has high levels of loot and is moderately dangerous. And once I've finished going out and actually building enough options in it so that it doesn't get too repetitive, this should allow me to fill in all of those hexes between the specific points of interest really easily. So the kind of order of operations that we would fill the map in would be the handful of like big locations that I definitely know about. So the start in town, or Car's Tower in the Deadlands, or the location of the Radiant Crown. And then the next layer down would be all of our kind of fixed point locations that aren't like necessarily married to that point, so dungeons, things like that. But then we have a bunch of hexes where it is possible to just randomly generate stuff, and that this table is going to be super valuable for making that process faster but still feel tied to the world. And I think one of the ways in which it will do that is through what type of ruins they are. So like the secondary tables, so whether it's an Akmiri facility or whether it's an old world outpost or something like that. But then also cataclysm influence, because the arriving at a place and weird magical stuff happening is going to be like a hallmark of this campaign. And turning up and being like, oh, we've turned up at a Akmiri ruin where a tower from the Sky City is buried in the ground, but there's strange, moderate magical anomalies that are happening around it. Or maybe it's a reality breaking anomaly and there's like weird gravitational stuff and all this kind of weird and crazy and wonderful stuff. I think this table is going to really help with building out the kind of point crawl element of it once the map itself is done. Welcome in, Agile Monk. How are we? You came in right at the end, just about to start wrapping up. But we've been working on the map of Sunscar this evening, like figuring out what's going on with the elevation on the map, and then starting to lay in some of the stamps as an example of how to do that. As I say, my brain is starting to turn to mush, so I figure we'll go for like 5-10 more minutes. So if anyone has questions, comments, or anything, throw them into the chat now before my brain completely shuts down and I become lost to the world. While I hydrate. In terms of other elements that I know that we will need to add, or things that I've already started thinking of in terms of like unique interactions and stuff on the map, I've got one down on like the southern area of the Verdant East, of the idea of a Shadow of the Colossus style thing, where there's a great kaiju monster that, as the Sky City fell, a piece of the Sky City has like lodged itself into this ancient monster's back. So now we've got this towering Godzilla-like creature that wanders the forest with a dungeon like impaled into its back, because I think that the visuals of that are really cool, and it's something that could be really easily telegraphed to the players ahead of time. So I've put a couple of markers down for that, for like, here's the marker for where the monster is, but also here's the sort of general region where they should start seeing this thing's footprints, where they should come across these huge depressions in the earth and realize that, oh, there's something very, very large living down here. And then, you know, they can choose to follow up on that. They can choose to run away. If they come across the kind of kaiju monster by accident, then they could see that it has this structure jutting out of its back and be like, oh, I bet there's good loot in that. And figure out, do we try and bring this monster down? Do we try and climb it as it's walking? What do we do? Do we wait till it's asleep and try and climb into the structure on its back while it's asleep and then risk it waking up and us being stuck up there? Like, I think there's a lot of fun stuff to be had with that specific encounter. Other stuff, other fun things that I've already thought of. Some remnants of crashed ships that have failed to make landfall. So, like, seeing evidence of other people trying to make landfall on this island and it failing, and kind of reinforcing the fact that the safe town is really the only safe place on the island. And I think there'll be multiple points throughout the map where we can place either destroyed ships or people that have crashed here and then, like, been forced to live in the more dangerous parts of the island, and it's driven them mad. So one option I've got is, like, out in the desert. I like the idea of there being a band of Gith raiders who maybe their Spelljammer ship or some other kind of vessel has crashed here and they can't get away, so now they're just like desert raiders and just cool vibes. The Gith look really cool, and them in a desert setting. What I was picturing was the Hellions from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which kind of look a little bit like the Gith, or some of the portrayals of the Gith. And just that sort of physical appearance of a bunch of Gith out in the desert really speaks to me. As I say, I've put down some ley line connections and some menhir, some standing stones. So there's 6 standing stones placed already, 1 for each of the ability scores. So they're like Skyrim style. You can approach them, interact with them, get a bonus to one of your stats. And the goal is to put a couple hundred of these style of pins in, where it's like, this is a fixed location of something interesting that's there. And then for all of the rest of it, use that generator once the generator has had enough entries to become like really robust. To be like, it's a ruin, it's a magical phenomenon, it's a creature, and really fill it out. So that no matter where the players go, what the players do, there's always something there to springboard off of. Because I think that for a West Marches style game to work properly needs a lot of like springboarding of information. The players either need to come to me and be like, what have we seen around here? Or they need to be like, we're gonna go in this direction until we find something interesting. And then it's on me to be like, well, what interesting is in the world? And that's the stuff that I want to figure out before approaching people and like kicking this thing off properly. I like the idea of some forewarning for specific dangers, much more realistic than suddenly springing something on the players. T-Rex don't sneak up on you type of thinking. Yeah, exactly. Like, some of the biggest nasties should have some telegraphing to be like, if you keep going in this direction, you are going to have a bad time. A desert unicorn that's actually dangerous because it's a unicorn that doesn't have a forest. I've never thought of a unicorn in any other setting than a forest. That's a really good point. So, I think that's about me done for the evening because my brain is fully turned into mush. But, touch wood, hopefully we're back, same bat time, same bat channel next week, and we'll do some more world building. Not 100% sure whether we'll do more map forward, like incarnate based stuff again, or whether we'll do legend keepery stuff and more of the usual diving into the specific world building. I'd be interested to know what you folks would like to see, so let me know in the chat and in the comments. If you are watching this in VOD after the fact, I would like to know down below what you would prefer to see next time, whether you want to see more map stuff or whether you want to dive into more world building stuff, or if there's another aspect of this world that you'd like to see us focus on next week. At some point soon, I think we'll start diving into some of the setting guide stuff. So we'll have an affinity session where we really nail down like trade dress and start getting some stuff put down into like a document style thing, because I think that'll be fun and useful to start thinking about the kind of information that you want to present to readers using this as a product, because thinking about it like that helps to understand what do I want to put in front of myself and my players as the information that needs to be articulated to them at any one time. If you are new here and aren't already subscribed and you want to see more stuff like this, do hit the subscribe button because it does really help out. If you want to join a community of like-minded GMs and players, you can join my Discord, which is that button there, and chat with me and a bunch of other folks about all things TTRPGs. And then if you want to check out more of my stuff, link to my website's in the chat as well. But until next time, happy gaming.